Welcome to the Brownstoner podcast. Welcome. We're here today to talk about brownstones and townhouses. We're going to get started
Sorry,
in
I
just
just got in. I'm so sorry.
no problem. Sam is joining us. We're live now with our audience. We have a great panel for everyone today. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of activity in the market, particularly and crazily during the pandemic. So a lot of great information. We have panelists that are experts at what they do. They're here to answer your questions. So please feel free to use the chat function to ask questions. Sometimes they can answer them directly, or I'll try to get to questions. We really want this to be an open conversation with the audience. So just to remind you, this is being recorded. So we will send this out. If you miss something, don't worry about, taking fast notes. This will be available to all of you. We will email all of you this webinar, as well as all of the contact information of the panel. So feel free to reach out to them after. That's what they're here for. That's what they want to do. I want to thank our panelists and our sponsors, of course, which are the Corcoran Group, Chase, Overlay Office, and MMPS law firm. So, with that, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. I'd love to just start off by introducing or having our panelists introduce themselves to just share a little bit about them. I'm going to ask them to reintroduce themselves when I ask the first round of questions, because I can see that we have people continuing to join the webinar. So why don't we start off with Sephra with Corcoran. Please introduce yourself and say hello.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Sephra Tobin. I am a real estate agent here with the Corcoran Group in Brooklyn, where I live and own property. I work here with buyers, sellers, investors across Brooklyn, sometimes Manhattan, and mostly people coming into New York for the first time, investors across the globe as well.
Terrific. Thank you for being here. Our attorney at law, Peter.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. My name is Peter Gleason. The law firm is MMPS. I'm a residential real estate attorney, which means I represent buyers and sellers of all types of residential real estate in New York City, Long Island, Westchester. My law firm is primarily real estate. We have a couple of offices, New York City, Long Island, and Westchester. And again, mainly focusing on real estate.
That's great. You cover a lot of ground.
Yep.
We have an architect with us. Abigail, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Abigail Coover Hume. I am the founder and director of Overlay Office. We are located in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We do a range of residential and commercial projects. We're full service, so beginning to end, from just starting to look at a townhouse to putting the finishing touches and moving in the furniture at the end.
Terrific. Welcome. Thanks for being here. And everybody needs money to buy, right? So we have our mortgage banker, Sam. Sam, please introduce yourself.
Happy Friday, everybody. Sorry it was a little late. I've been with Chase for about 8 years now. My market is right now in the downtown Brooklyn area, but I can do mortgages in all 50 states. I focus on doing jumbo and all sorts of programs. We have 5% down program, 10% down programs, mortgage insurance programs. We can get into that later. But yeah, I've been doing this for about 18 years. So
Terrific.
looking forward to working with everybody.
Thanks for being here. So let's jump into it. You talk about interest rates are very low. So Sephra, let's talk about the demand. So it seems that the demand for townhouses and brownstones in Brooklyn is almost like an all-time high. I'm sure low interest rates are helping. How should a buyer prepare when they start a search? I mean, what can you tell people, particularly around townhouses, how they should start the buying process?
Well, I say this a lot. Again, I'm Sephra. I say this a lot because my buyers come to me partly because we do these wonderful webinars that focus on brownstones and townhouses. That's our specialty. And they come looking for opportunities. So the most important step in seeking any opportunity is being able to recognize it. When it's right in front of you, you also want to be able to take advantage of it. So you have to be prepared. Watching this is one way. Coming to me is step one. I conduct sort of an interview with my clients. What's their end game? How do they want to end this process? Where do they want to end up? What are their goals? And then I set up a team with the panelists here and other folks along the way. And we want to get them to the finish line with success. And the very first step is, how much money do you have? It's a tough question. People don't like to talk about it, but we need to know what we're going to go shopping with. So we start with financing. If you're financing, let's get you, set up with a pre-approval.
So let's go to Sam, talking about pre-approvals. What are the steps for financing? And honestly, I think what Sephora wants to know and what everybody should need to know is, how do they figure out what they can afford?
Okay, so we basically have 4 steps when we're looking at the pre-approval process. We have having dependable income is important, meaning you need to have at least 2 years of employment. Underwriting wants to make sure that's stable. Having a low debt to income ratio is important. So we would compare that from your monthly income to your monthly debts that are on your credit report, along with the new mortgage that you're taking. So we have to take a look at that. Savings is important. So we want to make sure you have money for a down payment, closing costs, property taxes, tons of stuff that comes in. So you want to make sure you're well prepared when you're making this type of transaction. And last but not least, most important is the credit score. They range from between 350 to 850. If you have a 350 credit score, I don't think this phone call's for you, but hopefully everybody's in the higher range for the credit score. But those are the four most important things we look at.
And Sam, what numbers are the high end? What would you say are really the well-qualified buyers when it comes to the credit score number?
I'd say everybody that's buying in the millions is typically between like 740 and higher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great to know. Sephora, one of the things that I love about Brooklyn, I think most people that are interested in buying it, is all the different types of townhouses that there are. I mean, obviously, it's like the full scope in the borough. What types of townhouses should buyers be aware of, and how does that impact their pricing?
Well, there's so many different types of townhouses. There's federal style row houses. There's wood framed houses. Ultimately, the types of homes are based on why they were built, when they were built, for whom, the draw of getting people from Manhattan to Brooklyn on the park. You see stately homes. Many things contribute to the pricing. You've got the width of the home, square footage, multifamily, single family. Of course, it's going to be, how does this house fit into the needs of the buyer? I like a multifamily home. I like 2-family. I like passive income. The main thing that I share with people about Brooklyn is they're not building more houses. We're fixing houses, we're upgrading, we're renovating, we're gutting and going up, but nobody is starting from scratch just to build a house, a single family house. So buy a house, because even though right now there's an undersupply, there will always be somewhat of an undersupply.
Good perspective. And it seems like people are really picking Brooklyn over, many of the other neighborhoods or boroughs in the city.
Yeah, there's nowhere else to live.
Agreed.
Well said from a passionate Brooklynite. So Abigail, let's talk about an architectural perspective. Give us a sense of what buyers should be looking for when they're house hunting, whether, from your standpoint, it's location or ceiling height or floor plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I suggest first is to look for the things that you cannot change, right? So that would be location, things like the width of the building in 99% of cases. I think I would start there. And then, I think the kind of next wave of renovations, the thing that starts to be the trickiest is, structural repairs. So, pretty much most buildings in Brooklyn, when you purchase them, are going to require, some system upgrades like mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So I would pretty much assume that those are going to be on the table. But it is still possible to find, buildings over 100 years old that don't require a total structural overhaul. So that's something that can help in terms of timing and cost.
What about deal breakers? And then on the other side, must-haves. Is there anything you can speak to in terms of those?
I mean, I'm in the business of renovating these buildings. So for me, there's no real deal breaker. There's only opportunities. And again, like, I think it goes back to kind of the things that you cannot change. Even with the width of the buildings, like, we've done amazing renovations at 15, 16 feet wide, versus 20, 22, it really depends on your needs. So again, like, I think the must-haves go back to the things that you can't change. So like, location, maybe like the facade and the style of the house, but depending on like if you're in a landmark district or things like that.
That's why they need to bring you in. So people like me don't have vision. They need you to bring in the vision of what can be done with some of these.
Yes. And that's a good reason to get us involved early, to look at what the potentials are for the building. Because oftentimes it's hard to tell, when you walk in a building that hasn't been touched in 50 years.
Thank you. Peter, let's talk about an attorney's role. Sometimes it blows me away. And I think I said this on earlier, real estate webinars where people like are looking at multi-million-dollar properties and then want to print contracts online and not get the proper attorney. So I think it would be great for you to really just explain the attorney's role and the really critical reasons to have a strong attorney when making a purchase.
Sure. So New York State and New York City in particular is very different when it comes to real estate transactions. The reason is that the contracts, unlike a lot of the rest of the country, are very much negotiated, marked up, revised again. There's a lot that attorneys do to mark up the contracts and negotiate them certain ways. In addition to that, in the city of New York, there's many agencies that have the ability to place liens and violations on properties. So you really do need a seasoned real estate attorney, mainly to make sure that you're getting what you bargained for, and that, clean title, for example, is one of the big ones. And you need someone well-versed in, title clearance issues, and just to make sure generally within the contract, there's nothing out of the ordinary. We do find some unscrupulous sellers attorneys who will try to, see what they can get basically and add, items to their rider attached to the contract, for example, which is totally not customary and, perhaps very unfair to the buyer, for example. So just a couple of reasons why it's important, to have somebody that specializes in real estate within New York. The contract process is one that usually just takes a couple days. It's a pretty small world in New York City. A lot of, the attorneys have probably worked with each other before. I often find the same people on the other side. So yeah, you really do, teamwork is another thing that we haven't really mentioned, but I've worked with, I think, everybody on this panel, and I can say that everyone is very well qualified, and a warm referral from somebody that you're working with really is important. And it's because chances are, if you trust that person, they're referring someone that they know and trust as well. So it's really important to have, a team that knows New York City real estate.
Terrific. Thank you.
Hey, Josh, I just want to mention one thing. When somebody is ready to actually start looking, Chase does have a program called the Home Buyer Advantage Program, which basically issues them a conditional approval letter. We would review their income, their assets, and their credit history to make sure they qualify. And Sephra could attest to this, that this letter carries a lot more weight than just a regular pre-qualification. It's a little bit more in depth, and it would just say conditional approval letter on there. It's good for about 90 days. And basically, we could give it to them within a couple of days after reviewing everything. So they'd feel more secure looking for a home.
And I have to imagine, Sephra, it's important to have that in a competitive market like we're in now. If somebody's going to get a couple of bids, I'm sure they're going to look at not just the bid, but really the financing behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really put yourself in the position of the seller. If you open a store, we're selling shoes today in the story, and somebody walks in and, they're like, listen, I make a lot of money. I'd really like to buy these shoes. okay, show me the money. I want to see your money. I mean, there's no like, we don't buy things on promise. We have to have the credit. We have to have the pre-approval. So I'm taking clients out shopping this evening. I'm taking them out tomorrow and Sunday. And when we do that, we say, what's in your pocket? What do you have to shop with? Nobody likes disappointment. And part of what Peter said about, working as a team, all the pieces have to be put into place and the communication has to be there to have a fluid, process in the buying and selling world. And that's what we're here to do, is to make it as easy as possible and give people the tools that they need. I know that when I purchased my home in Brooklyn a long time ago, I didn't have an agent. I didn't know anything about borrowing money, and I was very lucky. But if I had it to do it all over again, I may have made different decisions. So it's important to have a team that you trust.
So let's stay with you on timing. I'm sure you get asked all the time, is it a good time to buy? Is it a good time to sell? What's your feeling just in terms of the market today and just in general?
So it's easier to say, when is it not a good time? And it's obviously person specific. It's a bad time to sell when you need to sell, because there's some desperation there, or there's some other underlying need. So you can't necessarily make good decisions, and we don't want to make decisions during, this uncertainty of needing something. But it's also not a good time to buy when you have to buy. Your lease is up in a week. That doesn't make any sense. So right now rates are low. I'm not in Sam's position, but I don't foresee them going any lower. Everybody that's wanted to refi already did, and we're not making any more houses. So if you are in a position where you're financially secure to make a purchase, now is the time.
Well, Sam, let's hear it from you. How low are interest rates? And really, can you give a little bit better clarity in terms of what the rates are on the different structures of the available mortgages, as well as based on credit score?
Yeah, I mean, rates right now have been very unpredictable. So since the election, they've been, going in every direction possible. I actually thought they were going to start to go up again. And then last week, they just started to pull back again into the high twos for 30-year fixed and all of the programs. So it's really hard to say what's going on. I do think it's a good opportunity to take advantage of this when you have such low rates. I mean, I'm actually offering some people as low as 1.875 on 30-year fixes if they're able to move over with relationship. Yeah, we have relationship pricing at Chase. So if you're able to move over a certain amount of money, I have to calculate through the grid. It's possible to get you that low. It all depends on the loan amount. It's like a whole program, but it's definitely a great time to purchase. And then the ARM products are pretty low too. We have some like low ARMs, like as low as 2%, even lower. So there's lots of great opportunity, and I think you can definitely buy more for your dollar right now because the rates are so low, and inventory in New York is going to be going out. I feel like it's always going to be a hot market, so you're not going to go wrong at this point. That's my view.
You're making me want to go out and buy something tomorrow with those kind of rates.
I'm telling you, they're like credit card introductory rates, right? 1.99, but you get it for a mortgage. Can't go wrong.
Almost free.
Yeah.
Sure, it depends on a lot of variables, but that's why people.
Yes, exactly.
Out to you to give specifics. So thank you. Abigail, let's talk about construction. It could be scary. It could be intimidating, but it also could cause a little havoc. So what do you usually recommend in terms of renos when it comes to people buying them? What should they do before they move in typically? Like, what would you recommend that people kind of get out of the way before they move into a property?
Construction's not scary. No, it can be scary and overwhelming. Before you even said that, I was just thinking, I would do as much as humanly possible, living on a construction site, no matter, and I've had clients do many different kind of phasing variations, and, that's something we can certainly help people do and figure out, because sometimes there's just, not a choice. But it's always a struggle. So I think as much as can be done before you move in, the better. But things like, I think some things that are done off site, like millwork, and some things that are more finished based, it may be easier to kind of do those down the line when you go on vacation or something like that. But definitely any infrastructural systems, all of that should be done, and some of it legally has to be done before you can occupy the space safely.
That was going to be my next question for you is, when obviously you have great vision. So if somebody wants vision in terms of what could be done with a space, that's, certainly where you come in. But where else do you come in terms of when people need to get an architect legally versus maybe just get a contractor?
Stop freaking answer.
I'm like, well, I just wanted to say that, I work with a lot of different people. And one of the things I like to do when presenting a house for sale is to have Abby walk through the house. Sometimes Sam will walk through the house. I want this to be, approved. And, what are the options? So when somebody comes to look at the house and they've got questions, like, you know what, call these people, call this architect, call this lender, because I am a real estate agent. You're asking questions, that require the expertise here. And very often Abby will draw up a plan of what could be done to a home before it goes on the market. That's very helpful for people to see what the possibilities are. I would say most of the time you need an architect to do that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Brooklyn too, especially like there's not much construction you can do without filing, so that's part of the full service package. And also, like Peter was mentioning, most properties in Brooklyn have some sort of baggage. There's some open permit, there's some open violation, there's some issue, and they're issues that can be solved, but the earlier they're on your radar, the better in terms of kind of smooth offers and closings. And so, we can kind of help, with everybody else, like put together the strategy for that before you even put in your offer. So you have a bit of an understanding of what you're getting yourself into.
And one thing I would just add to that is that sellers often want to push this problem onto their buyer. And that's not always possible for one very simple reason. It's that the mortgage lender may not allow you to close as a buyer with a violation, with an unpermitted structure, with an open permit. So therefore, as Sephra said, it would be very advisable to get a jump on that, if there are any concerns prior to listing, so that you can, be ahead of it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all good advice, and that's why you guys are here. And I think everyone's listening. These are all extremely important points when you're making such large investments or, a decision that's going to impact your life. I'm going to open up to questions. We've had a lot of questions in. Sam, when you threw out that interest rate, the question go through.
It was a couple of times, not all the time. But I do have a lot of programs I can put them in to get them in the ones if they're really interested. I have to talk to them now.
That's amazing. We do have a lot of questions about that, but let me start off with one question here that I have, and I guess it could be for you, Sam, Sephra. It's a young family looking to buy a brownstone to what they call house hack. So in other words, they plan to live on one level and rent out the other two in this case. They have $30,000 cash on hand and an annual income of $115,000. However, like a lot of people, they have student debt at $90,000. So is the debt a hindrance to purchasing a brownstone? And if not, what are some options out there that they could pursue?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, unfortunately, student loan debt is going to be hit against them for the monthly debt. We're going to just factor it in like we would do on a normal loan. There's no forgiveness for that at the moment, unless it was maybe a government loan and it's deferred. So if you're taking an FHA loan, I know they have programs where if the student loan debt is being deferred, they won't hit them for the debt ratio, but conventional, the normal way, you're always going to get hit for it. So it's always going to be calculated in the debt ratio. Unfortunately, I don't have any options for that.
Sephra, any input from you in terms of that?
You know, this would be a client that I would start working with, and although I'm not a financial advisor, but I would advise them to obviously pay down that debt, work with Sam, talk to, all of these people about the process. I actually met with somebody who saw this original webinar who was in a very similar situation. And I spent 2 hours with her just kind of explaining the process of real estate, buying, holding, having tenants. So it's never too early to learn the market and the process and what owning property is all about. I think it's definitely a smart move to own multifamily, but it just may not be a situation where they're closing on a property in the foreseeable future. They've got to pay down that debt. But the education is available.
Right, or we just have to get a price within their budget, that's all, which is plenty out there.
I mean, plenty of questions, Sephra, in terms of where the market is going now and what are the neighborhoods that have the best value?
Values perception, it's hard to answer that. Like I've said about multifamily, if you're somebody that can manage a 2-family, if you are interested in having a tenant, then do that. It's great. Like right now I've got a 2-family house for sale for 3.1. You guys featured it. It's 191 8th Street and it's stunning. It's totally turnkey. You don't have to do anything to this house. And you can have a tenant in this house pay a chunk of your mortgage. So for me, I love this. I love the idea of that. You've got privacy and you've got income. If you want to look at value, I think the key first step is if you can afford to buy a building, a house, you're already one step ahead. You're already heading towards value. Real estate, for me, it's always a good investment, and being in the market is always important. If you're on the outside, you're waiting to get in.
Sure.
Please. Did you want to add something, Peter?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. Well, Peter, here's another question maybe you can address, and it's really in regards to zoning.
Mhm.
Do you help your clients in terms of figuring out what the zoning is and what they can do with a property? Who really comes in there to help?
Yeah, so on a base level, I would say I do. It is a very specific practice. So frequently we would get, if it gets too complicated, we would usually refer out to a zoning attorney. Architects sometimes get involved. So yeah, it's not really, generally transactional real estate attorneys don't get too far into it, but I'm well versed enough to, tell people whether or not, what they're doing is appropriate or if they need more help.
Abigail, question for you. People were asking about, are there any types of builds that are better than others? I assume maybe they're talking about wood frame versus brick. Anything that you can talk about in terms of, what is the highest quality in terms of a townhouse build?
Quickly on the zoning tip, usually that's like one of the first things that we do is a zoning analysis. And then depending on the complexities, work with an attorney or a zoning attorney to figure out more details. In terms of the builds, I mean, it really every single one is unique. Wood frame definitely poses more challenges, especially in row houses where there are shared party walls and it starts to become a fire rating issue. But as that being said, we're working on a few right now. There are problems that can be solved. All in all, like the way the Brooklyn townhouses were originally built is amazing, and they're not going anywhere. So, the bones are good. It really depends on like your preferences and what the needs are in terms of the difficulty of the build. And, if you're doing an extension or not, but wood frame oftentimes does require some more structural work than if we're talking about a masonry building.
Great feedback. Thank you. Sam, I got to ask you some of these questions because there's a lot coming in regards to financing, which I think one of the really basic yet important question. Do they have to be a Chase, doing business already with Chase in order to work with you?
No, absolutely not. No, you don't need to have an account to work with us. We're open for business for everybody.
And even refis if they have mortgages with other banks currently?
There was a COVID overlay for a little while. That's maybe why they feel this way, but we have removed those overlays about a week ago. So everything's back to normal pretty much, except for the down payments on the jumbo products. We haven't opened that up yet. It's an exception basis.
Mhm.
But everything else that was like a roadblock or, a stop sign has been lifted as of last week. So definitely contact me if you have any questions about things that maybe you had some problems with in the past few months.
And then also a few questions here on people that may not have current income, maybe they're not employed right now, or they have assets tied up in equities or with other real estate, but they have assets. How important is it to have, in a current income stream or not have cash, but have other assets on hand?
It all depends on the transaction. So if you're doing a purchase, obviously it has to be, we typically, again, we lifted a lot of the guidelines. So the reserve requirement, meaning money for mortgage payments needed after you close, has went down. It was like at one point, like 18 months we would need, and it went down to 12, and now it's down to like 3 to 6 months. It's very reasonable. So that's important to have those type of assets for a purchase. A refinance, if you're doing a rate and term refinance, we typically don't need any type of post-closing assets for too much, just a normal amount. And like every transaction is different. So if they want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to go over their situation, see what I can do for them.
And just to reiterate for everyone that's watching, we are recording this. We will email it out to everyone I know some people may miss some things. We will be providing you with contact information of each of the panelists. Because again, like Sam's talking about, a lot of this is probably very variable on your situation. So you probably want to have a one-on-one conversation with most of the panel on your specific needs. Abigail, let's talk about move-in ready versus a fixer-upper. What would you say in terms of your preference or how you look at that when it comes to people buying?
I mean, I think the great thing about a fixer-upper is that you can really make the space what you want and what works best for you and your family and your needs. Oftentimes with move-in ready, while more convenient and time-saving in many ways, you're buying somebody else's renovation, right? And what somebody else needed or wanted or projected somebody would want. So, the fixer-upper really gives you the opportunity to, fine tune every detail to what the needs are for you and your family, which I think is, a really great opportunity in Brooklyn to be able to do that in a townhouse. While it seems like maybe the formula is straightforward, there's a lot of variation and a lot of great creative things you can do to really personalize the space for your needs.
What about budget? I mean, let's talk about what people should prepare. I mean, when it comes to, let's say, mechanicals and wet rooms, is there any direction you can give? Maybe it's price per square foot, or is there any parameters that people can kind of prepare themselves for when it comes to budgeting renovations?
I mean, that's a very tricky question. And that's another thing that we like to try to do upfront as much as possible, even before people put in an offer, help give kind of like a very ballpark budget, because it depends on so many factors. But that being said, your typical mechanical system for a 4-story townhouse is going to be somewhere in the like $40,000 to $60,000 range. But again, like you might have to tear down ceilings, you might have to do other work to make that happen. While bathroom, you can do the Honda of bathrooms, you could do the Rolls Royce of bathrooms. So, but again, like kind of a general rule of thumb is like $15,000 to $20,000 for a bathroom. So it's tricky. I mean, I've renovated a whole townhouse on $150,000 and I've done it on $2 million, so it really is, I think, figuring out, again, what your needs are and working with somebody who can kind of help lead you through the process and like kind of keep tabs on the budget the whole time so that, you know, you don't end up with any huge surprises down the line.
What about time frame? Is there anything you can talk to in terms of people preparing in terms of how long renovations can take?
Yes. I mean, the biggest thing is the biggest like thing that's outside of people's control is the filing process with the Department of Buildings, which is an upfront thing. You know, so, and again, depends very much, the timeline depends very much on what you're doing. That can be anywhere from 1 month to 6 months to a year. So getting that ball rolling as early as humanly possible, I think is key. Even, you know, before you close, you can be designing and preparing all of those things while you're kind of, you know, so you're making use of that, you know, 2 month closing time or whatever it is. You know, in general, like if you're going to do a gut renovation, it's going to be a year process. You know, minor renovations, of course, it's possible to do renovations in 3 or 4 months. It really, again, depends on, you know, what you're doing. But I would just be prepared, you know, for there to be things outside of your control and for it to take longer than anyone anticipates.
You know, just had a question pop up here, which is interesting. You know, what about backyards? A lot of people buy townhouses for outdoor space. What can you talk about in terms of people that are looking at, you know, redoing a backyard in terms of budget, scope, time, etc.?
I mean, the backyard is really kind of the last thing in a renovation, because a lot of times it ends up being a staging area or, you know, other things are happening. I mean, a lot of backyards in Brooklyn have lead in the soil. So you want to think about, you know, having it tested and, you know, potentially removing and replacing soil. But, you know, the backyard is a great place to save on your budget and to do things a little bit more DIY. You know, there's also some great nurseries around that can help you. But again, I would like caution against getting too excited and doing too much in the backyard until everything in the house is pretty close to being finished. But, you know, I mean, I think when my family, when we renovated our first backyard, it, you know, was like a $3,000 thing. So it's possible to do it very affordably. But again, you can also spend $50,000. So it's kind of figuring out what you want and getting the right people to help you.
Terrific. Sam, let's jump in a little into some particulars. So
Okay.
appraisals, how is an appraisal and a purchase affected based on something? And I think Peter, you know, spoke to this a little bit. If the kitchen is in the wrong place or there's non-working appliances, I mean, how do some of these things come into play that people really need to be aware of?
It's typical in Brooklyn to have a 3-family home. And right now they're only using 2 of the units and there's a missing kitchen in the 3rd unit. So then typically you would think that's a 3-family purchase, but if, you know, we would have to get an exception and the appraisal would have to come in to show that that 3rd kitchen is not being used or anything and the home is really being used as a 2-family home. So that would actually help you because then you would get better pricing. I'm also doing people with 2-family purchases and the 2nd kitchen is gone and I'm doing it as a 1-family purchase. So that would also help them with pricing and the down payment's less when it's a single versus a 2-family, and a down payment for a 2-family and a 3-family is also a difference in down payment. Appliances always have to be working. The bank will not close if the oven's not working or, you know, water's not running. All that stuff is very important. So yeah, that's important. Can't be holes in the ceiling or anything crazy. All that stuff has to be patched up. The investment for the bank has to be safe and secure before they give that money.
Interesting. Who would think that an oven could hold up like, you know, a townhouse purchase?
Yeah, we need all that done.
But I guess, Peter, that's what you're there to protect the buyers, correct?
Yeah, generally speaking, the contract does call for all of the major systems, heating, plumbing, electric, working order, as well as the appliances. So yeah, hopefully that's covered by the contract, but we do run into issues, as Sam mentioned, that, on occasion, the appraisal does come back with some negative items, in which case the seller has to address it. And then sometimes the appraiser will have to come back out and ensure that it's done, and only then will it proceed.
Well, let's talk about multifamily, because I feel like a lot of people need that in order to be able to afford to buy a townhouse, right? I mean, with prices, going up, what do you need to be aware of if A, there's an existing tenant, or B, you want to bring in a tenant?
Sure. So the first thing I would tell people is that most residential real estate attorneys, that is attorneys who represent buyers and sellers, usually do not also practice landlord-tenant law. A lot of people think it's one and the same, but landlord-tenant law is a very specific litigation practice in New York. So my first point of advice would be to, if you are getting into a new lease, make sure you're dealing with a seasoned landlord-tenant attorney to make sure you have all the available protections that you can. To your point about the taking a tenant over, generally, if the seller has tenants existing in the property, there are two options. One is either the seller will be able to have those tenants out before the closing, which is usually between 60 and 90 days from the contract signing. If they can't do that, or if the tenant is on a lease that extends beyond 90 days, for example, the only way the buyer may be able to purchase is to take the tenants and the buyer become the new landlord. If that's the case, we try to vet the existing tenants as much as we can, which is to say, ask the seller's attorney, for example, to provide, proof that they've paid timely for the last 12 months. Things like that, just to make sure that the buyer has some level of comfort that, the existing tenants are, worth taking over and will pay, following the closing. So that's what we would normally do as a buyer's attorney in that case. Sometimes we do run into issues, though, where the seller says the tenant will be out by closing, and then we get to closing and the tenant holds fast and doesn't go anywhere, in which case they could sit for months before, especially these days, before a landlord is able to evict them. So for those reasons, sometimes sellers will actually pay people to get out, just so that they can move on with their lives and not, have to delay the closing, in which case the buyer might actually be able to cancel the contract and get out if they were promised a vacant, unit and the tenant's not out by closing time.
And I'm sure with everything with COVID, there's been these eviction moratoriums
Yep.
that can have an impact on potential buyers for them to know about.
Exactly, which makes it all the more, important to vet any possible tenant you might be taking over, or any new tenant for that matter, as best you can.
Well, Peter, thank you, and the whole group of panelists. You guys were fantastic, very informative. I want to thank all of you watching. I want to be sure, I know there were a lot of questions that we did and didn't get to, so make sure to please follow up with our panelists. We will provide all of their contact information after this in an email. I want to thank again Sephora and the Corcoran Group. I want to thank Sam and Chase. I want to thank Abigail and Overlay Office, and of course, Peter with MMPS. Thank you so much, everyone, for being
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a nice weekend.
here.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone. Take care.